have been targeted over here. I'm going to come back to you. Let's take a look at the past history of Balochistan. The region has been marred by several conflicts in the past 76 years. I'm going to take you through them starting from 1948. And as we had spoken about how the creation of Balochistan came into being and how there were several forces into play, including the British Empire and back in the day Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who then sealed the fate of Balochistan, which came to be merged and made part of Pakistan, despite the very desires of the people of Balochistan to have a separate sovereign state. And this continues to be a cause of concern and grief for the people of Balochistan, who have been fighting relentlessly but unsuccessfully for their sovereignty and self-determination. Here's a look at the history. Insurgency by Baloch separatists, Islamist militant groups over economic and political marginalization has taken place in the Pakistan history, in the Balochistan region, which is 44%, believe it or not, of the entire Pakistan. Insurgencies by Baloch nationalists began in 1948 with 5 major conflicts that took place in Pakistani history. And let's take a look at which are these 5 significant landmark conflicts. First conflict took place between 1948 and 1950. It was the princely state of Kalat, which was acceded to Pakistan in 1948. There was a rebellion for an independent state right after. The first conflict also saw over 1,000 militants in revolt, captured Jhalawaan and led attacks up until 1950. Now, this was the start of many civil wars that were going to erupt in Pakistan and Balochistan. Pakistan forces ended up recapturing the area. The militants suffered heavy casualties that led to the end of the first conflict, with the rebels left defeated at the hands of the Pakistani military. The second conflict between 1958 and 1959, Pakistan's one-unit scheme deceased government representation for tribal leaders. Last Khan of Kalat, Ahmad Yar Khan, was stripped of his powers, which was a massive setback, which was because it led to a reinforcement that Pakistan will not let go of Balochistan as a separate sovereign territory. Guerrilla war by Nawab Nuroz Khan and 1,000 armed Baloch rebels demanded abolition of one-unit scheme, and the release of Ahmad Yar Khan. That was their petition and the motive for fighting the second civil war. They were forced to surrender after peace talks and Pakistan government's amnesty pledge, which made them believe that there will be release of their leader and there will be a negotiation which will be carried forward between the two regions. But there were 160 insurgents that were tried and sentenced. Nawab Khan's son and nephew were hanged for treason. So that was the backstab of Pakistan government against the Balochis. There was the third conflict that emerged just a few years later in 1963 and continued for 6 years up to 1969. There was a new constitution which was in 1956 that was a limited provincial autonomy of Balochistan. The third conflict saw the militants building their own bases, bombing railway tracks, ambushing cowboys. There were a number of similar attacks that we saw today that were implemented, orchestrated back then as well. The army retaliated by destroying militant camps and bombing the villages in Balochistan that killed several civilians. The Baloch separatists agreed to a ceasefire after amnesty was granted to them by the Pakistani establishment. The fourth conflict that took place between the years of 1973 and 1977. Now, this was a 4-year military conflict between the Pakistani army and the separatists after the provincial government of Balochistan was dismissed by the Pakistani establishment. The martial law was imposed by Pakistan, and Balochistan People's Liberation Front began guerrilla warfare against the Pakistani government. Now, after that imposition, the Pakistani forces, which were assisted by Iran, there were 3,300 Pakistani troops, 5,300 militants. There were thousands of civilians who ended up losing their lives in this conflict. The fifth conflict that began in 2004 and the longest one continues up until 2025. The key events include in 2006 the killing of Nawab Akbar Bukti, who was a Baloch leader. He was killed by the Pakistani forces. In 2009, the key Baloch nationalist leader was abducted and killed. In fact, there have been a number of landmark events that have built the fifth Baloch conflict up until today. In 2010, there was increased militant activity, armed clashes between insurgents and the security forces of Pakistan. These armed clashes led to a number of deaths in 1990. This is in fact taking a look in the past, the casualties and fatalities that the Balochis have had to face at the hands of the Pakistani forces. Between 1973 and 1977, there were 5,300 Balochi militants, rebels that were killed. And since 2000, there have been 1,929 Baloch rebels that have been killed at the hands of the Pakistani forces. There has been a rise in enforced disappearances. There have been extrajudicial killings of the Baloch leaders and civilians. There have been Baloch Human Rights Department that reported that there were 28 victims of torture. There were 5 extrajudicial killings, 33 enforced disappearances that have been reported, suspected of Pakistan's wrongdoing. In February, this is Sajid Hussain, the man over here, which was the Baloch journalist who was found drowned in Sweden when he sought asylum. This took place in March 2020. There have been many such examples. There was another Baloch human rights activist who sought refuge in Canada, Karima Baloch, and she was mercilessly assassinated. Suspected attack on her, targeted killing by the ISI. She was killed in a suspected assassination. She was found submerged at Toronto waterfront. This assassination took place in December 2020. There were more than 5,000 reported cases of forced disappearances that were emerging out of Balochistan, which were perpetrated by the Pakistani authorities. There were 529 Balochis who were missing from 2001 up until 2017. That's the estimated figure. There were 99 enforced disappearances in October 2024. Between August 2010 and August 2014, there were 140 forcible disappearances. Bodies were later found with bullet wounds. In fact, this timeline goes on where there have been forceful abductions in November 2023, ethnic profiling, harassment and forced disappearances of 69 Baloch students. There were 50 people that continue to remain missing. So this has been the tragedy of the people of Balochistan, who have been fighting for their rights but have been silenced mercilessly, and there has been little support that they have been able to get from international organizations and powerful countries all across the globe. In 2015,